Well, good morning for everybody on the West Coast of the United States. Good afternoon on the East Coast. And if you're in Europe, good evening. And welcome to the third and final lecture of the Archaeology Lecture Series, co-sponsored by the UCLA Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for the Study of Hellenic Culture and the Coatsen Institute of Archaeology. I'm John Papadopoulos, professor in the Department of Classics and the Coatsen Institute of Archaeology at UCLA, and I'm very pleased to be your host from my own home here in central Athens. Now, in this series, we began in the mountains of Arcadia in the early Iron Age, Archaic, and Classical periods, and from there we ventured north to the Ambracian Gulf and to Epirus, to trace the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. This evening, we move to the Cyclades, Cyclades, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, an old friend and colleague, and someone whose work I've much admired over the years, Marisa Marthari. Oftentimes, one does not remember the first time you meet somebody. And although I'm sure that Marisa does not remember when we first met, I certainly do. It was December the 2nd, 1989, and the venue was the International Conference of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, entitled Weiss and Blegen, Pottery as Evidence for Trade in the Aegean Bronze Age, which celebrated the contributions of two giants in Aegean prehistory, Alan Weiss and Carl Blegen. Marisa Marthari received her MA and PhD degrees from the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens with a doctoral dissertation entitled Akrotiri Thera, the Pottery of Volcanic Destruction Level. And that was in 1993. Dr. Marthari went on to become an Ephor of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities of the Greek Archaeological Service and is now Ephor Emerita. She's directed excavations at, among other sites, Skarkos on Ios, about which she will speak this evening, the largest known Early Cycladic II settlement, as well as Kastri on the island of Syros, one of the most important fortified early Cycladic settlements in Greece, dating back to the 3rd millennium BC. The latter conducted under the aegis of the Athens Archaeological Society. She's also had a long-standing academic association with the excavations at the prehistoric site of Akrotiri on Thera. Dr. Marthari was formerly director of the Ephoria of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities of the Cyclades and Samos, regions where she conducted numerous excavations and directed projects on museum exhibitions and presentations of archaeological sites. Last week, I introduced you to the term machomene archeologia, referring to archaeology, as it were, of the front ranks in terms of cultural heritage and protection of antiquities. Indeed, for her efforts, Marisa in 2008 won the grand prize of the European Union for Cultural Heritage, the Europa Nostra Award for her work on Skarkos. This was the same prize that our speaker last week, Konstantinos Zachos, won the following year. In 2012-2013, Marisa was the Peter Warren Visiting Professor in Aegean Prehistory at the University of Bristol, and she was also a visiting fellow at the University of London Institute of Classical Studies in 1984 through 1988, and the Commission für Allgemeine and Verkleinende Archäologie in Bonn in 1988 to 1989. She also served as a member of the Committee for the European Bronze Age campaign of the Council of Europe at Strasbourg, 1993 through 97. Among many other things, Marisa convenes the Cycladic Seminar here in Athens, which is the venue for the archaeology of the Cyclades. Not only does she organize wonderful talks, she brings together leading scholars to discuss mutual issues of interest. I've attended these talks whenever I'm in Athens, and what's especially great about them is that somehow Marisa always manages to find a first-class bottle of raki, tsiporo, for the reception afterwards. I really don't know where she gets all the good stuff. Dr. Marthari has lectured in Greece, Great Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Switzerland, Austria, Cyprus, Turkey, the United States, and Canada. She's published widely on late Bronze Age Theran pottery, Cycladic prehistory, and on issues of archaeological heritage. Most recently, she co-edited 2 books, Early Cycladic Culture in Context, London 2017, and another entitled Beyond the Cyclades, Early Cycladic Culture in Context from Mainland Greece, the North and East Aegean, London 2019. She's a life member of the Athens Archaeological Society and a corresponding member of the German Archaeological Institute. As fate would have it, today happens to be International Archaeology Day. In fact, it's the 10th anniversary of the International Archaeology Day. And I can think of no one better than Marisa to present a talk about Aegean prehistory, especially on the site for which she was awarded the Europa Nostra Grand Prize. And her topic tonight, of course, is the early Cycladic site at Skarkos on the island of Chios. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marisa E. Marthari.
Good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, be you in Los Angeles or in Athens. John, I'm bringing raki from Naxos, always. You have to know it. Before I begin my lecture, I wish to thank Professor Papadopoulos for kindly inviting me to give a lecture for the UCLA Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for the Study of Hellenic Culture and the UCLA Kotzen Institute of Archaeology. I also thank Professor Gestel for her support and Mrs. Breen for her technical help. Our subject today is the early Cycladic site at Skarkos on the island of Chios. In this lecture, I shall refer specifically to 4 individual topics which are numbered in the table you see on the screen. So in this lecture, I shall refer specifically to 4 individual topics which are numbered in the table you see on the screen. 1, early Bronze Age Cyclades and Skarkos. 2, the early Cycladic II Skarkos settlement. 3, the early Cycladic II Skarkos society. And 4, the presentation project of the site at Skarkos. 1, early Bronze Age Cyclades and Skarkos. The Cyclades are a cluster of small islands at the heart of the southern Aegean Sea, surrounded by large land masses, as well as other large and small islands. The Greek mainland with its offshore islands and Euboea to the northwest, the Asia Minor littoral and nearby islands to the east, and Crete to the south. The distinctive culture that developed in the Cycladic islands in the early Bronze Age, 3rd millennium BC, was first identified and dubbed Cycladic civilization by Christos Tsoundas, founder of Greek prehistoric studies, in his writings in the late 19th century. Colin Renfrew renamed it the early Cycladic culture in his most influential book, The Emergence of Civilization, in 1972. This culture is associated with the Cycladic people's dynamic maritime presence in the Aegean, as demonstrated by the discovery of Cycladic artifacts at many sites outside the Cyclades, as well as the identification of Cycladic-type cemeteries at sites in Attica, Boeotia, northern Crete, and coastal Caria. Furthermore, boats represented on early Cycladic frying pans and on rocks in public spaces in certain early Cycladic sites reflect long voyages and raids. However, while the distribution of Cycladic finds and customs allowed us to learn much about the expansion of Cycladic features outside the Cyclades, we know little about the Cycladic communities themselves until the 1980s. Our picture of early Bronze Age Cycladic society was based primarily on information from cemeteries, most of which had been looted, and their impressive grave offerings, such as marble figurines and vases. The settlements identified were very few in number, limited in size, and poorly preserved. The best of these was at Castri in Syros, which is limited in size and dates to the Castri group phase, corresponded chronologically to the late Early Cycladic II or the transition from the Early Cycladic II to Early Cycladic III. In contrast, almost nothing was known of the architectural forms of settlement sites in Early Cycladic II, the Keros-Syros culture, although this was the peak period for the development of the Early Cycladic culture, mid-3rd millennium BC. For this reason, there was a dearth of evidence concerning socioeconomic conditions in the Cyclades during this period. Accordingly, Skarkos on the island of Ios, identified by the speaker in 1984, is a key site. It sheds light on these obscure aspects of the Cycladic early Bronze Age and at its major developmental phase, at its major developmental phase. Skarkos was a large, thriving settlement, demonstrating that during the early Cycladic II period, the settlement's urban and architectural forms were quite sophisticated, its craft production and exchange mechanisms well developed, and the use of stamp seals common. As such, Skarkos provides a much more solid foundation for our understanding of Cycladic early Bronze Age than we had before. 2. The early Cycladic II Skarkos settlement. The site at Skarkos stands in a privileged position on a hill in the coastal plain of Kato Kambos, midway down the western side of Ios, in close proximity to one of the safest and largest sheltered harbors in the Cyclades. The site, as shown mainly by excavations conducted there in 2000s and early 2010s, within the framework of 2 European Union-funded conservation and presentation projects, now ranks among the multi-period Bronze Age Cycladic sites, 3rd to 2nd millennia BC. However, what is particularly important at Skarkos is the large early Cycladic II settlement, Skarkos Phase II, the remains of which dominate the hill. This is the settlement I will refer to in today's lecture from now on. Skarkos II is uniquely well preserved for its time. The buildings are two-storied, with most still standing to the height of the upper story. In the area of the later agricultural terraces, the walls of the buildings are preserved to a maximum height of 3 meters, 4 meters in places where there is dry stone walling. In fact, in these latter areas, the farmers prefer to incorporate the early Bronze Age walls into their own dry stone wall construction rather than destroy them. Abundant objects, many of them also well preserved, were excavated inside the rooms of the buildings, sometimes just where they had been left when the settlement was abandoned. The settlement's estimated area is 1.1 ha, approximately half of which has been brought to light. Its plan can be traced clearly over a large and continuous excavated area and is not deduced from building remains exposed in small trenches, as is the norm for early Bronze Aegean. For early Bronze Aegean residential sites elsewhere in the Aegean. This allows us to understand the layout and nature of the site quite well. The dense urban fabric follows the length of two long main streets, up to 2 meters wide, which encircle the top of the hill and widen at intervals to form small and large open spaces. Short streets at right angle to the main ones lead from the foot of the hill to the summit. Incorporated into the street network are the building blocks, the insulae, each one of which is occupied by two discrete buildings. 10 such insulae have been uncovered in the excavated area, revealing a total of 55 buildings. The insulae at Skarkos are the result of what can be called a prosthetic architecture, that is, one in which new buildings were added to those adjacent to them. The settlement is organized concentrically, but it does not appear to be originally protected by a separate defensive wall. The evidence, though, shows that it was necessary to increase the level of protection in the time of Skarkos II, i.e., at some point within the early Cycladic II period. This was achieved by sealing the openings in its outer zone by stone walls. Most importantly, the gate to the north of the settlement's eastern side was sealed by a narrow stone wall. With these closures, the settlement acquired a single perimeter wall, demarcating and obviously protecting the buildings. This manner of protection and fortification at Skarkos is without parallel in the early Cycladic world, perhaps because the settlements that are contemporary and of corresponding importance are not preserved or have not been excavated, particularly at their outer limits. The settlement is provided with a network of drains, which runs from the top to the foot of the hill. These were trenches cut into the bedrock, lined and covered with schist slabs within the settlement, and ending in open ditches beyond it. The primary construction materials are stone, wood, and clay. Schist and gneiss are the principal local stones used for the walls from the foundations to the roof. Marble, a particularly durable stone, was used in certain cases for the construction of specific architectural elements, such as thresholds or sockets. The walls vary in thickness from 80 centimeters at the ground floor level to ensure the building stability to only 45 centimeters at the first floor level. At the highest point of the ground floor walls, a recess of 35 centimeters was created in the wall's interior face to support the timbers for the upper story's floor. In some buildings, the point that separates the ground floor from the upper story is denoted on the building's exterior by a cornice of schist slabs, which possibly had both an aesthetic and a practical purpose, the latter being to protect the lower part of the building from rainwater. The Skarkos buildings display noteworthy similarities in outline, structure, circulatory patterns, internal arrangement, and inferior fittings. They comprise, as a rule, more or less rectangular rooms at both ground and first floor level. The larger examples have two wings or rows of rooms, parallel or at right angles to each other. Most of the buildings are two-storied. In fact, many ground floor rooms are semi-basements due to the steep slope of the ground. All internal doorways are usually placed in the same part of the wall as its center or exceptionally its corner to allow for ease of internal circulation. An outside stone-built staircase provides access to the upper story in each of the two-storied buildings. However, it is possible that there were also interior wooden staircases leading from the ground floor to the upper story. Cupboards in the form of niches in the wall, usually in pairs, are quite common, and there is evidence that they had wooden doors. The artifacts and organic materials found inside the Skarkos buildings, excavated to date, indicate that they are houses as a rule, or, to be more precise, household residences. Each house includes spaces for special activities, such as areas for the preparation and cooking of food, areas for agricultural and pottery storage, and living areas. Yet there are exceptions. At least one building in the southeastern part of the settlement, the building of the figurines, appears to be related to specialized craft activities. The Early Cycladic II Skarkos economy and society. Skarkos lies in the most productive area in all of Ios due to its close proximity to the larger of the island's agriculturally rich plains. From the plant and animal remains, it seems that agriculture and animal husbandry played an important role in the economy. The community of Skarkos participated in early Bronze Age exchange networks and had developed connections with sites on other Cycladic islands in mainland Greece and probably other parts of the Aegean. Pottery was imported from other Cycladic islands and the Greek mainland. The imported pottery includes coarse wares, transport jars, in particular from other Cycladic islands, and fine and semi-fine wares, such as the Orpheus boats you see on the screen from the Greek mainland and possibly Milos. Contacts with Milos are additionally attested by the import of raw material. Specialization existed at the level of the household, covering the needs of the local community. There was also productions regulated at a communal level. Pottery production was quite well developed. A great variety of tablewares, transport and storage vessels, and specialized cooking vessels intended mainly for the local market were manufactured by region's skilled potters. Obsidian technology was also well developed. Skarkos was involved in the Melian obsidian traffic, and the finds prove that it was a center of obsidian working since all stages of the production chain for chipped stone artifacts are represented. The excavations yielded obsidian nodules, cores, working debris, and finished products. Obsidian concentrations show that the manufacture of tools took place at the flat roofs of some buildings. Stoneworking appears to have been widely pursued at Skarkos. There is a great variety of stone vessels and tools for everyday use, mostly of schist and gneiss. Likewise, there is abundant evidence for the production of marble implements and primarily high-value products or prestige woods, such as figurines and fine vessels. Several of the marbles used, including a white and a blue or dark gray variety, are local. Skarkos was an important marble working center. 50 figurines, two folded arm examples of the Halandriani variety, and 48 schematic forms, mostly of the apeiranthos type, and a considerable number of fine vessels have been found in the settlement. In addition, two unfinished schematic marble figurines and more than 30 unfinished marble vessels were also located there. The carving of the vessels and the figurines, at least those of small and medium size, took place in workshops in the settlement. Excavation data shows that a building in the southeast part of the settlement served as a marble workshop, as we referred earlier. It is particularly significant that 16 figurines were found there, whereas other buildings usually yielded only 1 to 4 figurines. I have therefore called it the building of the figurines. The building of the figurines produced exactly the same finds as the settlement's other houses. However, certain special finds and concentration of finds indicate that one or more craftsmen may have been working as well as living there on marble and possibly on a variety of other materials, and especially in the two adjoining rare rooms 398 and 399, which yielded 5 and 6 figurines respectively. An unfinished marble figurine, an unfinished marble bowl and marble flakes, which could be marble processing waste, and fragments of fine marble vessels were found in room 398. All the kinds of tools suggested for the manufacture of marble figurines were found in these two rooms. These include an emery tool, tools and raw pieces of pumice, and abundant obsidian blades. Lumps of mineral red pigment were also uncovered. These lumps, together with a bone tube used as pigment container from room 399, indicate the use of pigments here. We should bear in mind that 3 out of the 5 Skarkos figurines with indications of red pigment were found together in room 398. Other not so common objects found in this building are stone and lead spools, which Ramstorff suggests are balance weights. In conclusion, the finds and their contexts leave little doubt that activities related to marble working took place in the building of the figurines. This is the first instance of such a combination of evidence from an early Cycladic site that allows us to suggest marble working in a specific location. Let's move now to the sealing practices, which were used by the Skarkos community in Early Cycladic II, Early Bronze Age II. Through them, one can better appreciate their society. Until the 1970s, the very few seals known from the Early Bronze Age Cyclades were from cemeteries. In settlements such as Agia Irini in Kea and Kastri in Syros, the use of stamp seals was attested only on hearths and pottery. Indeed, the stamped motifs of these objects had been considered purely decorative. From the 1980s onwards, however, some finds from domestic contexts showed that the situation in the early Bronze Age Cyclades regarding seal stamping, at least in the late early Bronze Age II or Castri group period, was quite different from what had been believed. A group of at least 9 sealings and a clay seal were excavated at Zas Cave, Naxos, in a domestic context of this period by Kostas Zachos and Angelika Touzougli. This very important find, together with some other rather contemporary sealings from Marchiani on Amorgos and Agia Irini on Kea, suggests that during the late early Bronze Age II or Castri group period in the Cyclades, seals were used to impress not only hearths and pottery before firing, but also raw clay lumps intended to seal containers. That is, they were employed in ways similar to those attested at the contemporary sites of Lerna in the Argolid and Geraki in Laconia. What was happening, however, in the Cyclades in the early Bronze Age II or Early Cycladic II period, Keros-Syros culture, there is then, in fact, almost a complete absence of sealings everywhere in the early Bronze Age II Aegean, including the eastern Aegean islands, South mainland Greece, and Crete. Strong support for a use of seal stamping beyond the purely decorative and already from the early Bronze Age too is, however, offered in a recent thoughtful review of the seal impressions corpus, comprising numerous examples on hearths and a few on pottery from Agia Irini Phases 2, contemporary to Skarkos, and 3 by Wilson. Here, he shows that they are likely at least to have been social markers of individuals or family identity. Despite the absence of sealings, I consider that Skarkos' rich evidence argues for a use of seals, beyond the decorative in the Cyclades, beginning in the early Bronze Age too. The most thought-provoking finds from Skarkos are the seals themselves. Cubic seal-impressed terracotta objects in large numbers, and seal-impressed pottery, all from excellently documented contexts. 3 stamp seals, 2 of clay and 1 of bone, come from the Skarkos Early Cycladic II settlement. I should here emphasize that it is the first time that so many seals have been found in an early Bronze Age II Cycladic settlement, 3 of them and all from secure contexts. The terracotta cubic objects from Skarkos are of particular significance. They are pierced by 2 horizontal and parallel string holes. To date, some 300 objects of this type in various sizes and weights have been found in the excavation. Most are plain. More than 20 bear an impressed or incised sign, usually an X or parallel oblique lines, and just one has a leaf impression. More than 30 have a seal impression, circular as a rule, at the center of one of their wide sides. It is important to realize that according to Ingo Pini, who examined some of the Skarkos material, the raised relief impression on such an object, EOS Museum Catalogue number 1456, would have been made by a metal stamp seal. Metal stamp seals were rare in the early Bronze Age Aegean, and their owners must have enjoyed special status in early Bronze Age societies. The impressions are all different from each other. which suggests the existence of a corresponding number of seals. References to similar objects from other early Bronze Age Cycladic and Greek mainland sites are very rare indeed. However, a considerable number of such objects are known from Middle Minoan and Late Minoan sites in Kythera and Eastern Crete. Pierced cubic terracotta objects are usually considered to be loom weights. Only Weingarten has suggested otherwise. In her paper in 2000 in the Acta of the 8th Cretological Congress, based on her study of late Minoan objects of this type from Eastern Crete, she proposes that they were both fasteners and labels or markers for sacks. She also proposed that they represent a homely system of fastening and tagging sacks within domestic or craft storage areas. Skarkos' eloquent excavation data strongly supports this view. The pieced cubic objects at Skarkos are found both in domestic storage areas, usually next to clay storage vessels, or among their fragments, and in the workshops. They may be regarded as fasteners for sacks and possibly for cloth or leather covers for the mouths of storage vessels holding tight the cords. They could have been intended according to their size and weight for smaller or larger sized containers. Those examples with some kind of sign, including seal impressions, may additionally have served as labels, possibly indicating who owned the container or its contents, their type, origin, or quality. At Skarkos, the less common practice of seal stamping pottery is also found, mainly on the handles of transport jars. The seal impressions on ceramic vessels, like those on pierced cubic objects, may also have been a kind of labeling, signifying ownership of the vessel's contents, or in this case, even their origin or the place of manufacture of the vessels themselves. The current evidence leaves no doubt that seals were not all and only used for decorative purposes in the early Bronze Age II Keros-Syros culture Cyclades. On the contrary, there were sealing practices possibly for indicated ownership of the containers, the nature and or properties of the commodities stored in them, or the origin of the containers. The stamping practices from Skarkos II and Agia Irini III shows this. The actual seals found at Skarkos II and Markiani III, the frequency of seal stamping at both Skarkos II and Agia Irini, and the variety and complexity of seal motifs from both these sites all show that intensive use was made of seals. It may be thus suggested that the method of marking and securing property by seal-impressed lumps of raw clay may have begun in the early Bronze Age II at Cycladic domestic sites, although the archaeological record has not as yet provided any further evidence for this. It should be emphasized that the special moist conditions in the Zas cave allowed several sealings to be preserved there in context of the next early Bronze phase. If Cycladic settlements of both early and late early Bronze Age II had been destroyed by fire, as at Lerna and other Greek mainland sites, more sealings or concentration of sealings might have been found there. 4. The presentation project of the site at Skarkos. In the case of an archaeological site as important as Skarkos, it is impressive to pass from investigation to protection and presentation of both the movable finds and the site itself. The Skarkos excavation was the opportunity for me to work in the framework of the Greek Archaeological Service to create an archaeological museum in the Horo of Ios in 1999. There was no museum on Ios until then. In this museum, which covers all periods, a large part of the exhibition is dedicated to the Bronze Age and in particular to the early Cycladic culture. Apart from the museum, particular attention was paid to the legal protection status of the site and its immediate setting. The Skarkos area was so classified by ministerial decision. In this way, the surrounding natural setting of the site has been protected. In addition, certain of the fields that fall within the first level of the protection zone have been expropriated by the Greek state. Skarkos is the only organized site in the Cyclades to present to the public a settlement of the Cycladic culture of the 3rd millennium BC. It met the preconditions for a presentation to the public as it combines greater archaeological importance with an excellent state of preservation. 2 projects for its conservation and promotion were included in European Union support frameworks. The objectives of the projects were all fulfilled during the late 2000s and early 2010s. The early Bronze Age settlement has been conserved. The excellent preservation of the early Bronze Age buildings by Aegean standards necessitated a sensitive conservation program that followed cultural management principles. Considerable attention has been also paid to conserving all the buildings and other constructions connected with traditional agriculture and stock raising, which were formerly the means of livelihood in the area. The agricultural terraces and the terrace walls have been repaired using traditional methods. Repairs were made to the existing buildings, which were seasonal houses in the fields, and barns, stables, and pigsties. After special studies, only the use of these buildings was changed in order to serve the needs of the archaeological sites, as we shall see in due course. The remaining agricultural constructions in the area, such as the circular stone-paved threshing floors, the cisterns and wells, were cleared and conserved. The excavation area has been enlarged in order to facilitate its comprehension by the public. A characteristic part of this early Cycladic II settlement is now visible, accessible and understandable to visitors to the archaeological site. The outermost dry stone filled walls of the expropriated area have been repaired to create the single enclosure wall of the archaeological site. There are 2 entrances to the site. One of these entrances was in fact the old entrance to a field, which was utilized for the needs of the archaeological site. On the flat land at the east foot of the hill, to which the 2 entrances lead, a visitor's reception area has been created. An abandoned stone-built traditional animal shelter situated there, close to the entrances, has been converted into a multi-purpose building necessary for the function of the archaeological site. It includes a guardhouse, a ticket booth, a small shop, and toilet facilities. Seating has been arranged in the reception area for visitors to relax. In the reception area, flower beds have been arranged, which are planted exclusively with species from the flora of the Skarkos area. The visitor's route has been laid out so that it coincides in general with the natural access from the east to the top of the hill, leading from the ticket booth to the excavated early Bronze Age settlement. From here onwards, the visitor's route is defined by roads, stone stairways, like those the farmers built to go from the lower to the upper terrace, lead to the hilltop. Group assembly areas and visitor information points have been created with information panels. On the flat area to the southwest of the hill, a non-intrusive theater has been constructed adjoining a terrace wall. Set among almond trees, it cannot be seen at all from a distance. It is very useful for guided tours, presenting educational programs, and organizing events. On the lower west slopes of the hill, a complex of byres and pigsties has been converted into modern storerooms and conservation laboratories for archaeological finds. The project was awarded the 2008 European Union Prize for Cultural Heritage, Europa Nostra Top Prize for Conservation, for the outstanding quality of conservation work, and above all, the minimal and extremely sensitive character of the interventions having no detrimental impact on a unique landscape. You see on the screen pictures of the official prize-giving ceremony in Durham Cathedral. The project was selected from 109 candidates from 29 countries. On the day the local award ceremony was held on Ios, almost all the island's inhabitants celebrated the event, school children with their teachers, whole families, old people, and so on came to embrace the project and us. They brought us flowers and sweets. This was particularly moving for the members of the State Archaeological Service, who are also responsible for controlling building on the islands and are frequently at odds with the islanders' desires. Moments like this really make our work worthwhile, however tiring it may otherwise be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. That was a wonderful talk. I think you'll all agree with me. What a special site this is. And I especially want to congratulate you for this wonderful work that you've done at the site to make it available to the public. You're really the model for us all to follow. So congratulations.